Well, up until the age of about 27, I've been pretty blessed, and I was pretty invincible. And then life happened, right? You have kids. One of them is born with heart disease. The other one is born with autism. You leave house, you move to another country. Your wife loses her job. Your marriage gets dragged through the rocks and the mess. Your parents die. Other people die. You get bruised and a little bit more broken, but at the same time, you get a little bit more worldly and a little bit tougher. And when people come to you and say it's the end of the world, you can say, I've been in far worse places, and that wasn't the end of my world. So there's hope for you.
Hi, I'm Kim,
And I'm Pancho,
and this is Now That You See It,
the show about the ideas hiding in plain sight,
the patterns underneath the patterns.
the stuff that quietly runs your life,
These are the conversations you can't stop thinking about
and that you can't wait to send to a friend.
because once you see it.
You can't unsee it.
All right, folks, welcome. I have to say, for our Now That You Can't See It dedicated listeners, you will notice that it's not nighttime for me or Pancho. It is daytime because we're recording at a different time because we have a special guest who's joining us in yet a different time zone. And we are all over the world today. I'm in daylight. Pancho's in daylight. I think, Matthew, you're still in daylight, right? A
The
little bit?
last vestiges of it.
The last bits of it. So Matthew Kimberley is here to join us today for Now That You Can't See, Now That You See It. And we'll be talking about something that he can't unsee. But before you go, I want to just say how you're here. So I know you because I've been reading your emails. You know, you are many things, one of which is a business coach. But I've been reading your emails, following your work on Book Yourself Solid and other pieces of your work for a while. And I signed up for the Single Malt Mastermind, which is every Friday I get an email from you. And I write to you about what I'm going to do and a bunch of other things. And you write back. And it's been just a really lovely, both accountability, but also mentorship experience from across a very large pond. And you can tell people where you are. But we wanted to bring you on because you are a fascinating guy who has lots of stuff to share with us. And I'm really excited about bringing you on today and talking a little bit about something that you can't unsee. So Matthew, you want to tell us what that is?
Thank you very much, Kim and Pancho, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Something I can't unsee, and I've been we discussed it a tiny bit in the pre-roll, and it's kind of concentrated itself, distilled itself in my mind to be a question of fallibility, and particularly my own fallibility. There's been a very slow realization. It wasn't something I saw one day. It was a series of tiny paper cuts over the years. I'm 45 now. I'll be 46, and 20 years ago, I wasn't fallible. I was right about everything. You know, we all were. There was no doubt, no shadow of a doubt in my mind that I had all the answers. And experience over the years has, although made me perhaps more confident in my place in the world and the space that I take up, made me far, far more aware of the nuance that exists in a world where not a lot of nuance gets published or broadcast at the moment. And so the version of me 20 years ago, who knew everything and I was right all the time, I'm not saying I'm better than everybody else, but I sometimes read the newspapers and go, "What? Grow up! We were like that 20 years ago. Come on, you're a grown man, you're a grown woman. What's with the lack of nuance?" So I'm walking around with my jaw on the floor. Now, I do realize it's not all doom and gloom and misery, but I am increasingly aware that it's the empty vessels that make the most noise. And I find myself more and more disinclined to make any noise at all, just because I'm permanently not doubting my it's not an existential crisis, but wondering what the utility of contributing is if I might not be right. And so I'm far more interested in exploring the concept of wisdom rather than truth, I suspect.
The empty vessels that make the most noise. What does that mean to you?
I mentioned it on on another interview with another American friend of mine, and he asked the same question. Uh,
Is this a British thing?
could well be. It's imagine that you have a tin or a can or an urn or a canister, and it's got
Yeah.
nothing in it, and you hit it with a stick, and it resounds. There's a resounding sound, right? Because there's nothing inside it. There's nothing between the ears. Whereas if you fill that with sound, you get a thud. So
Mm,
hollow vessels tend to chime louder, if you like.
got it.
Does that make sense, or should I
Yeah.
explain it differently? Okay.
No,
Yeah.
that makes sense. I have so many questions, but I'm going to pick one, and that is related to you shared with us in the pre-show. You wrote a self-help book in your
I
20s.
did.
You did. What sound was your vessel making in that book?
Yeah, man. It was shouty. It was shouty. I was 27 when I started a blog called How to Get a Grip, and that was back in the early days of blogging. You know,
Mm.
it was easy to it was easy to make a lot of noise. There were a lot of empty vessels and not so empty vessels making a lot of noise. It was easy to get eyeballs. It was easy to get attention. And I was in a particular situation in my life. I just started my dream life, the beginning of my dream career. I was a company owner. I had a team of salespeople, all employed by me. I had a business partner, and I was picking up the phone 100 times a day. I was a sales director in a technology recruitment company, and I was on the course for being retired by the age of 35. I was going to be a millionaire. I was obnoxious, and I was very, very unhappy. And I thought, well, I've got this. I've got the office with the foosball table and the massage therapist who comes in on a Friday, and logo on the wall and all sorts. Why am I so desperately unhappy? And I thought I was ungrateful. You got what you want. Stop moaning. Stop complaining. But I needed to process it, so I started an anonymous blog, which was How to Get a Grip, which was effectively advice to myself. It was, stop complaining, shut up, get a grip, get off your sorry ass, do something, stop feeling sorry for yourself,
Mm.
think you got it bad. Anyway, it resonated. People liked it. A publisher tapped me on the shoulder back in the day when publishers were still looking for
Mm.
book deals off blogs, and it became How to Get a Grip, the book, published in 2008, 2009, somewhere around then, submitted around that date by John Blake in the UK. And it just kind of sat there. It was a lot of fun. Opened a few doors, got me started on exactly what I do now, because Blog to Book Deal was a newsworthy story, and I ended up in the States at blogging conferences and getting invited on podcasts to discuss things, and there was a snowball effect, and it freed me. It freed me from the trap I was caught in. I said, look, I don't love running a technology recruitment company. I do love talking about sales and marketing and working with small business owners, and that gave me the opportunity, gave me a platform to be able to do what I do from a geographically distinct place from where my client base is. My client base has almost always been very heavily in the United States, and I've been in Europe all of that time. First in Brussels, in Belgium, and now for the last 15 years in Malta, which is about as geographically isolated as any place could be. And then I got a call, and then I carried on, and I worked with small business owners. I developed my own intellectual property, my own programs. I worked very, very extensively with Book Yourself Solid. Michael Port ended up running that company for a while. And then I got a call out of the blue, maybe 5 or 6 years ago. I think it was just before travel stopped due to COVID. And it was a call from somebody I didn't know. It said, Matthew? I said, yes, 'tis I. And she said, listen, we own your book and we're republishing it with a new title, Get a Fucking Grip. And I said,
And got the Mark Manson treatment.
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that was immediately what I said. I said, look, haven't we had enough books with fuck in the title? And she said, yeah, I understand what you mean. I said, I'm a bit concerned it looks derivative from, my book came out before Mark wrote his book. So it was, and I didn't want to be seen as, because How to Get a Grip came out way before Mark's book. And I didn't want to be seen as somebody who was jumping on the bandwagon of sweary self-help books. But the publishers didn't care about my feelings. So they said, yeah, fair enough. But it's
Thank you
a
for your
genre.
input.
Thanks for your input. It's a genre now. It's what, where there is a section in the bookstores which is sweary self-help books, and we've got a commercial mind. I thought, okay, well, let's do it. And she said, would you like to make any edits to the book? And I said, well, I haven't thought about it in 10 years, maybe longer. And I got the manuscript back, and then I had to go and record the audiobook. And as I read it, I thought, yes, Kim, I thought the person who wrote that book was quite an empty vessel. However, I'm going to give myself some charity. It was a good book, sold thousands of copies, been translated into a few languages. And I've told this story before, but I would get emails from readers who said, thank you, you really helped me. I'd get very touching messages on social media from people who were really in a very dark place. And they said, look, it made a difference. I don't know if it made a difference in the long term, but it moved them enough to drop me a note and say, and the old hackneyed saying, if you try and help one person and is it the crabs on the beach or the starfish, you can throw a starfish or a jellyfish or whatever it is back into the beach, that story that all public speakers around the world, I managed to help one person, therefore it was worthwhile, even if I couldn't help them all. But the most meaningful impact story I had was when my youngest son, who is now 12, when he was a few months old, he got very sick, and we ended up in hospital for about 8 weeks, maybe a little bit longer, while he was on intensive care life support. And one of the doctors came up to me after a few days and said, are you that Matthew Kimberley? And I said, what have you heard? Uh-oh.
Depends.
What have you heard? Maybe. And he said, I just want to let you know, I read your book and it really, really helped me when I was in a dark place. And I said, okay, we got a deal. Look after my son and and we'll call it quits. So I don't disown that version of myself.
No.
There are things when I was 27 that I thought I knew that I didn't know the first thing about. Much as I'm sure that there are things at 45 that I think I know, but in time, I will discover that I don't know the first thing about. I think the difference between that person and this person is that I'm open to the idea that my knowledge is fallible. Back then, nah.
What's the thing that you would tell 27-year-old Matthew he doesn't know the first thing about?
I wouldn't. We'll have to make our own mistakes, right? There are things I might tell my younger self about to reassure him. Lean in. I don't think I'd say don't do that, don't say that. The version of me back then served the version of me that I needed to be. If I hadn't been such an empty vessel making so much noise, I wouldn't have got the book deal. If I hadn't got the book deal, I wouldn't be talking to you today.
100%.
Right? So I do have some regrets, but throughout the history of my life, I have some regrets and some missteps. And if my son came to me or either of my sons came to me to ask me for advice, would I give it to them? Sure, if they wanted it. I would absolutely. And sometimes I volunteer advice, and sometimes I tell them what to do, because that's the nature of fatherhood, right? But I can't say, going back to write the memoir, the autobiography, the story of my career, there are many times I would say, don't do that, because the consequences you won't be able to live with. And I don't think, up until today, thank God, touch wood, here's hoping that doesn't change, none of the choices that I've made have led to consequences that are unbearable for me or for anybody else, I hope.
It's beautiful. How's your son doing today, by the way?
Oh, he's great. He's jiu-jitsu and football and amateur dramatics and all the things you want a cardiac kid to grow up to do. He's not allowed to play rugby though.
Oh, yay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
It's funny. I often think about how we, despite how much we want to be the font of wisdom to, span centuries, we're often the font of wisdom speaking to ourselves from 3 to 5 years ago of just like, this is what we wish we knew just a couple of years ago. And I was just reflecting on when I was pre-kid, I was in my 20s, I was working for the state government, state of Rhode Island, and there were a bunch of interns, and I had to speak to the intern class. And man, I thought I was hot shit. I I was like, great. I have so much to tell you guys about what life is like. And it wasn't that sinister, but I did really think like I really need to tell you things that I've learned. And I remember,
Yeah.
I mean, I wish I could find it now. I think I had like 101 things you need to know about working in state government. And like I'd love to see that list now to see how much of that is true. But like one of the things was like no one's going to open your attachments to your email. Like you have to spell out what's in the attachments. No one's going to read them. That is true.
That's
I
still true today.
really think that's still true.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I'm reminded of this quote. One of my favorite writer is Joan Didion. And in one of her essays called On Keeping a Notebook, she says, I think about this all the time. She says, you have to keep on nodding terms with the people you used to be, even if you don't find them attractive company, because otherwise they show up unannounced at 4 a.m. and demand to know who deserted them, who betrayed them, who's going to make amends for this. And that part of you that wrote that book was there's truth in it, chew the meat, spit out the bone, and also whatever ills were going on, whatever hurts and harms were still unhealed or just like it had to hit the world. It's brave of you and courageous, but also like makes a lot of sense to stay on nodding terms with whoever that was. Because otherwise that person's just going to come up and say, wait a minute, who betrayed me? And it sounds like you've got that mix.
Yeah. I'm still proud of the book. I don't want to disown it, and I don't
Yeah.
disown it, but I do recognize that it was written by an earlier version of me. And I think my next book will be, how I lost my grip 20 years later. 20 years later.
Yeah, I mean, well, I guess what I wanted to say with all that is that like the 25-year-olds, the 22-year-olds, the 35-year-olds who are in the midst of grip losing and don't know what to do, it's very hard to speak to that group if you lost your grip a long time ago or got through that. You were speaking from the experience of being in it, which is the voice that folks want to hear, as opposed to I'm 20 years out and this is sort of what I vaguely remember about that time. And you were speaking to your audience.
Yeah. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
so.
Gotcha.
And I think that, I mean, I'm thinking about 27-year-old Pancho. I mean, even 23-year-old Pancho. I remember there was a point in time where I didn't know how the future was going to turn out. And I fully, honestly, like without a doubt in my mind, I remember being on a drive to Yosemite National Park in a car with some friends. I don't remember. I think I was, up for a summer internship, and I wasn't sure if I was going to get it. And then if I didn't get it, I didn't know what I was going to do with my summer. I think it was my last summer of being in university. And they asked me, "What if you don't get this internship? What are you going to do?" And I said with complete confidence, "I don't know, but things have a way of always working out for me for the best." And I lived my life with that felt sense as just how I operated on a day-to-day basis. And 5 years later, I was burnt out of working in a corporate startup and consciously moving into my van so that I could prepare myself to quit my job with minimal expenses. And that sense of things always work out for me, it's always, upward and onwards. That sense was completely demolished. I no longer felt that. And to some degree, the world we live in is the world we create for ourselves with the beliefs and the perspectives and the emotions that we carry. That's the lens that we interpret it with. And I wish I somehow still had part of that, right? That I still had that confidence that things are going to work. Like, it will work out somehow. I'll figure it out. I will end up ahead. So as much as you're saying, Matthew, that, that person was an empty vessel in some important sense, I feel like losing your grip, maybe to put it in your words, like something valuable is lost. And that's a question I've actually been sitting with in my life, is like, how do I get back to some of that, right? How do I create some of that? And I heard you say, like, nothing in my life has happened that's been so terrible that I actually regret it. How is this landing with you? How, even if you lose your grip, what are the ways in which you are, having written a book, navigating, maybe keeping some of that confidence of, I know everything from your 20s?
So I've got actually, before I answer that, Pancho, I've got a question back for you, because right at the beginning of that story you told, you said back when I was 27, 23, and I wasn't really sure how things were going to work out for me.
Yeah.
Do you now feel sure about how things are going to work out for you?
Oh, much less so. Yeah, no, it's more that then, um, there was an immediate response to it. It's like, I don't know what's going to happen. That's okay. Everything's worked out fine so far. Every time there's been uncertainty, everything will continue to work out fine. Things will be okay. As a matter of fact, things will just continue to get better. Today, when I have that same uncertainty about what's going to happen next, I now have lived experience that sometimes things don't just continue getting better. Sometimes you have significant setbacks, or a curveball comes out of left field and significantly, like, it just kind of upturns your world for a couple of years. So I can no longer hold that confidence, which I think on just a day-to-day basis made it easier to be successful, made it easier to be more effective, because there wasn't the fear that came with, well, what if this goes sideways?
All of that makes perfect sense. I have no idea where I'm going to be next week, next year, tomorrow.
Yeah,
I've got
totally.
no grand plan, and I, like you, but slightly differently to you, I always, and still today, very actively think it's going to be okay. I don't think it's going to be better. I think it's going to be okay. Perhaps I'm less ambitious than I'm definitely less ambitious than I was back then. I wanted to be retired by the age of 35, and then what? Well, actually, now I like not being retired. I like doing what I'm doing at the pace I'm doing it. But something I wrote in the book 25 years ago, which I do believe to be true, and also, Pancho, but for the and Kim, but by the grace of God, we're here talking to each other and not, doing ketamine or crack cocaine. For the grace of God, that's pure luck. We've perhaps made good choices in our lives, but we landed well, right? So I say that with absolute sincerity. Could be me, right? That could be me next year.
Yeah.
But something that I wrote 25 years ago in the book was, so I'll paraphrase because can't remember the exact words, but it was, if you know how to do the dishes and you mean it when you say thank you, you'll never be homeless. And this is about investing in relationships.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
But for the grace of God, there's no mental health disturbance there. There's no addiction issues. There's assuming that those things are true, if you can maintain meaningful relationships, I like to think that I've got the option of a dozen sofas to sleep on if I need them. And sometimes I have to lean on them, not necessarily in recent memory, but sometimes I'll need a loan, or sometimes I'll need a bed for the night, or a shoulder to cry on. And that, if you operate in a silo, if you operate in a vacuum, then it becomes very difficult. I used to volunteer back when I was a school kid. I'm not that worthy anymore, in a soup kitchen. And I met a chap who'd been a university lecturer, and and he was homeless, and he was there picking up food, and we got talking, and his story, and all the time I'm thinking he's well educated, he's been in a great career all his life, he's eloquent, doesn't have any addiction issues, so on and so forth. What's the deal? Why is he here? And he told me, he said his wife died. Very, very soon afterwards, there was a house fire where he was living, and he hadn't renewed the insurance. He didn't have any insurance, and he didn't have any friends to ask, or he felt that he didn't have any. And that always stuck with me. That was, although some people are solitary, I believe we're all becoming more solitary in many ways. But even if you hate people, and I've met plenty of people who hate people, you can invest in 2, 3, 4 meaningful friendships. And I believe that's the buffer for most people. And there's always exceptions because there's always nuance. But that's my philosophy. Some people are assholes and they just don't realize it, right? Why doesn't this person give me what I want? Well, look at your history. But generally, for the vast majority of us, if we can, community, family. I live in Malta, which is a small island, Roman Catholic, 500,000 people. Probably in the summer with tourists, there might be 800,000 people here at any one time. And there's close to no homelessness, like almost none, because the family unit is traditionally very important. Practically on a day-to-day basis, very important, because people don't leave home here. The furthest you can go is 12 miles away, right? Typically in the UK where I grew up, it was you'd go to elementary school in one town or location, then you might go to a secondary school somewhere else and you'd change, and then you'd head off to university on the other side of the country, and then you'd leave that town and you'd go to start work in another city somewhere. Here that doesn't exist, so the family bond is very, very strong. And it's actually enshrined in law in this country that neglecting an elderly relative is a criminal offense. If your elderly if your elderly relative needs you and you don't step up, you can be prosecuted in court. And that's why I keep telling my children. That's why I'm in Malta, kids. But there's, so Pancho probably went completely offside from your question, but I feel that confidence comes from two places. One, it's data, right? I can be confident at this moment in time that somebody has just tripped down a flight of stairs because they're drunk and has broken their toe. Statistically, my experience up until now leads me to fair confidence that somebody's getting injured in a fist fight right now. I can be pretty confident that, something bad is going to happen in the Middle East tonight. This doesn't make me enthusiastic. I'm not enthusiastic about having that knowledge, but those data points give me confidence. And I lean on that data as a source of confidence when I'm going through a rough patch. When I'm saying, I feel awful. I've got more month than money. I've just had a falling out with a friend who I love. My kid's being a dick. I can say, okay, you've been in this position hundreds of times before. It's okay. It's not the end of the world, right? No need to catastrophize because we have the data. When we don't have the data, then that confidence completely disappears. If you're in a genuinely novel situation, then you don't have that statistical confidence, and it's okay. It's okay. I mean, worrying is okay anyway. It's healthy, but I do lean on that, and I could become quite unemotive when it comes to analyzing situations that have the potential to be emotive. But then there's the other kind of confidence, which might be the one that you were referring to, Pancho, which I've suffered a lack of. 27-year-old me was recording videos, going live, publishing my innermost thoughts on the internet. I'm not publishing anything on the internet today unless it's very carefully curated, right? Just, I'm feeling more vulnerable. I do not have the confidence. I used to have the confidence to say, everybody wants to hear what I've got to say. These empty vessels who are making more noise are not necessarily empty anymore. Maybe they're just more confident. Maybe they're not overthinking as much as me. Why is it becoming increasingly difficult to show up and command a platform for me when it's becoming increasingly easy for every cell phone wielding teenager that I ever meet. What's going on
Mm-hmm.
there? So there's a kind of the chipping away at confidence. And I guess the confidence, it's like, because it's all linked to fallibility, it's like, it's not, I might be wrong, so I might as well keep my mouth shut. It's, does the world really need another opinion from Matthew Kimberley at the moment, when there's opinions all over the place from everybody right now? So confidence and confidence you can increase confidence by exposure.
Yeah.
If you walk into a party or your first day of school and you don't know anybody at school, you're not confident. Your body language shows that. You take up very little space, generally. Walk to a party where you don't know anybody, your first day at work, whatever that might be. And with exposure, sometimes a few hours, sometimes a few days, sometimes a few weeks, you stride in like you own the place. So confidence does come from exposure. But so do neuroses, and they all play off each other.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure you described something that Kim and I have talked about. We actually devoted an entire episode to this, which is
I wonder if you're going to say, okay, you go.
The Dunning-Kruger effect.
Yes. That's exactly where I was going to go.
You were on the mountain of stupidity, and you're like, I got this, I know everything. And then, and maybe you went through a valley of despair period. You're now in a place where you have some knowledge about this, you have some expertise. But what is characteristic to those people is they understand how much more they have to learn, and they understand there must be tons of other people out there in the world who are more expert than I am. I still have so far to go. So they're actually less likely to speak up and share what they have to say, even though what they have to say is richer, better informed, more well-rounded than their 27-year-old self, shouting from the mountain of stupidity, which again, like, that confidence is powerful in and of itself. But yeah, there's a lot to learn still.
So the Dunning-Kruger effect is the embodiment of the empty vessel. That's what I should have said the minute I said empty vessel would make the most noise. I should have then said the Dunning-Kruger effect. But I think my way of coping with that is, I don't know anything about what's going on in the Middle East relative to most of the people who are talking about it. I didn't know much about airborne illnesses, so I kept my mouth shut. Didn't prevent many people talking about their expertise, vaccination, so on and so forth. But I do know quite a lot about email marketing. That's something I've done for 15 years. I do know quite a lot about working with a handful of private coaching clients, and that tends to be what I talk about now. And that's my solution. So can you confidently, Matthew, stand up on stage, because I've done an awful lot of speaking in the past. Can you stand up on stage and say with confidence that you can give us the cure to, or a solution, or a series of tips how to be more productive, healthier, happier, wiser, and wealthier? I'll say no, but I could show you how to write a good email. Right. And
this is true.
That's how I'm approaching it. Areas of expertise, rather than, we do feel, and I get bored talking about this, not with you, and you're not boring me, I'm boring myself, but talking about how, things happening online are happening. Are they real world events, or are they, it's like, I haven't logged onto Facebook for weeks and weeks. I haven't been on Twitter for years and years. I like to look at pretty pictures on Instagram, but every now and again I'll hear about an industry drama that's happening, and this industry drama is always because somebody has said something online. I don't think, and this sounds weird as somebody who broadcasts and publishes, we weren't meant to share our innermost thoughts with the entire world. We just weren't. It kind of breaks down the fabric of community and society we were talking about earlier, right? Imagine walking into a village in Malta, great family connections going back generations. Everybody is, well, this does happen because it's happening online. But how weird it is if everybody was standing out their windows broadcasting their every opinion.
Yeah.
It's fucking exhausting. So I'm opting out of that, right? And this might be deeply unpopular, but the idea that silence is violence, which we hear frequently every time there's a cause,
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
every time there's a cause, whether that's military intervention in the Middle East, whether that's a school shooting, whether that's a high-profile case of police brutality, whether it's a disabled man having a Tourette's tic at an award ceremony, right? What I see and what we see frequently is Kim and Pancho are very obvious by their silence, or your silence on this issue is noted, right? And
Yeah.
I think that's not right. I think that's
If you're not with us,
actively
you're
not right.
against us. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lack of nuance. Why aren't you talking about it? I don't know shit. I, I can only make things worse, right? So we do
Yeah.
not have an obligation. I
Yeah.
was listening to a friend of mine who's a very good friend. She was on a podcast and she's very high profile, and she was talking about the dangers of being in the public eye and all the drama that happens. And I thought you wouldn't be aware of this drama if you chose to not participate in conversations that are just outside of your.
Yeah.
You don't need to have an opinion on everything. You really don't.
Are, are you familiar with Nassim Nicholas Taleb's concept of Wittgenstein's ruler?
I'm not. I'm familiar with
Okay.
Wittgenstein and Taleb, but not the
Yeah.
concept of the
Not
ruler.
yeah. So I don't know which of his books this is from, but it's the idea that if you use a ruler to measure a table, depending on the ruler's reliability, you may as well be using the table to measure the ruler.
Right.
And so the idea there, when you apply it to people, is if someone isn't reliable, if they're not an expert, if they don't actually know anything about the thing that they're opining on, their opinion about the subject says more about them, their lack of expertise, their biases, or, whatever, than it does about the truth of whatever they're talking about. And what I'm hearing you say is, like, I don't go near that, right? Like, you recognize that if you have an opinion about something that you're not an expert on, you, in some way, shape, or form, it says more about you and gets you in hot water more than anything else.
I think we need leadership, and I think we need democracy. I think we need to be able to choose our leaders, and leaders are generally people who are confident enough to say, "Follow me," right?
Mm.
And people want leadership. They desperately need to be told this is right and this is wrong. I don't have any solutions to this, but I do have a complaint about it. I'm not saying
Sure.
let's not have public debate.
Sure.
I'm not saying let's not have public debate. I think it's really important. I think your voice must be heard. But there are levels of that, right? Again, no solutions. I wish I had one, and I don't think. Listen, I love the world. I was having a beer with a school dad the other day, and he was saying how life was better when we were kids because we didn't have cell phones, we weren't addicted to screens, our children weren't addicted to screens. And I said, yes, that's true. I mean, we weren't, but also in my house, one of my houses when I was growing up, we had an outdoor toilet. If I needed to get in touch with my parents, or more importantly, if my parents needed to get in touch with me, they couldn't. They had no idea where I was. They had absolutely no means of meeting me. People say the streets are less safe for our children today. Nonsense. They can broadcast their location. They can call their parents within seconds.
Mm.
You are both too young to remember, but when I was out playing with my friends in the streets, aged 7, 8, 9, 10, if you got into a situation, you were screwed. You just had to pray that you weren't going to get beaten up, abducted, severely injured, because there was nobody to call. You'd have to get on your bike and ride to the nearest telephone box, reverse charge call to the operator, hope your dad was at home to pick up the telephone because he didn't have a phone on him either. We're not living in the worst time imaginable. We have many, many, many blessings. many, many blessings. And every generation finds their thing to complain about. And maybe now that I'm 45 years old, this is my era of being a complainer.
I was just remembering, like, yeah, maybe I didn't have to call the operator, but I definitely was out on my bike, and yeah, you had to knock on somebody's front door and have your parents all of the phone numbers memorized. This is a work number. This is the home number. This is maybe a third place that they go to phone number. Yeah.
You bet your ass I still remember. Like, I can
Yeah.
still rattle off. Well, it's weird. It's weird how long-term
The
memory
phone
works.
numbers, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure, for sure.
Yeah.
I'm
I
curious. Oh, go ahead. Mhm.
bumped into a school, an old flame from school, like almost 30 years ago.
Mhm.
And just after that, she got a mobile phone. She's still got the same number today. And I bumped into her after like 25 years and I remembered her telephone number. Just like that. I didn't have a cell phone, but she had it. She was a few years older than me, right? So she got the phone. I didn't. And I still remember it to this day. I was amazed.
It is, I find the question of, like, my kids don't really know my cell phone number, but I like, what when you say, like, call your parents, like, they now get they're gonna be 10 in August, but, like, they can if I'm like, "Okay, guys, what is my number?" But how I was probably 3, 4 when my parents made me memorize our house phone, 'cause that's it. Like, that's what you gotta remember, and now I'm like, What am I gonna make them remember?" I guess it is my cell phone, but we've never had a house phone, ever. That,
We've
like,
brought up a
the
good point.
identity.
I never got my kids to memorize my cell phone, but now I will. It never occurred to me. We've gone through the drill of what do you do if you get your phone stolen? Like
They do.
assuming,
Yeah,
which is you go and tell somebody who your mother is and what your address is, or who your father is and what his address is, and they're okay with that. But it never occurred to me to memorize that. Well, there you go. Always learning. Thanks, Kim.
always learning. You're welcome. I know. They to this day, especially COVID, had them when I started working from home, had them watching me work. And so now they make fun of me because they hear my work voice, and they'll walk around the house going, "Hello, Kim Paul. Hello, Kim Paul. This is Kim Paul."
So good.
Oh, yeah. So, Matthew, I'm curious about your inflection points. You're like the things that either emptied your vessel or filled it back up and changed the sound of what that vessel was. So, there's something about you that at 27 was like, not I can write a self-help book, but I can coach myself through this moment by anonymously writing a blog. Like, I have it in me to figure this out. What allowed you to do that? And then what brought you from that to where you are now, which is saying the next book I'm going to write is how to lose your grip?
How I lost
What
mine.
are those inflection
I
points?
wouldn't want to make it an instruction manual, but I certainly tell the story of how I.
There you go.
So I've always loved writing. I mean, writing has been deeply exciting for me since the age of 5 or 6. Just very exciting. And before I had the blog, I had a restaurant column. I'd write in student
Oh,
newspapers. Restaurant critic was a great job, by the way. That was a great job in Brussels. Go to a new restaurant each
oh,
week,
in
write
Brussels.
about it, and get paid. Yeah, right. Um, so writing had always been a way of, I guess, dealing with things. Dealing with any creative outlet that makes you feel fulfilled or is challenging. I think is probably good for you. I don't think anyone could disagree with that. I always enjoyed writing. So writing was the regular way of, and I also enjoyed performing. So I was a juggler. That was how my first job ever was juggling in the street for money. I,
Mm.
13, 14 years old, possibly younger. I'd go out to the local town on a Saturday morning with a hat and stick it on the ground and encourage people to throw me coins. Um, and I was an actor. I was an actor all the way through high school and then a couple of years professionally as well. And so I always loved, and I think writing in public for me was a bit like speaking in public or acting in public or performing
Mm.
juggling in public. So that was always a useful way of dealing with um, creative tension. And if you're doing something 9 to 5, which doesn't scratch any of those itches, you're in a permanent state of creative tension. You're like, I've got
Yeah.
this thing in me, but I can't
Mhm.
get it out. So I
Mhm.
really had no
Mhm.
choice but to get it out. And what happened? Well, up until the age of about 27, I'd been pretty blessed. You know, I'd traveled the world. I'd been relatively independent. I'd studied. I'd bought a house. Had I got married? I got married about the same time, and so on and so forth. And I was pretty invincible.
Mhm.
And then life happened, right? You have kids.
Mhm.
One of them is born with heart disease. The other one is born with autism. You leave house, you move to another
Mhm.
country. Your wife loses her job. Your marriage gets dragged through the rocks and the mess.
Mhm.
Um, your parents die. You get divorced. You think that the thing that you're going to do for life, you're not doing for life. Other people die that you love. You take lots of swings professionally, and only a handful of them hit, and you just get more and more. You know, each one. What is it they say? Is it what does it do? I don't know martial arts at all, but don't they like train themselves to take the blows? Like kick the shins. I've seen the Shaolin monks
Yeah.
toughen up by getting hit by
Yeah.
sticks, hit by sticks, hit by sticks. That's unusual. Normally, when you get hit by sticks, you get bruised and a little bit more broken, right? So that's what happens. You get bruised and a little bit more broken, but at the same time, you get a little bit more worldly and a little bit tougher. And when people come to you and say it's the end of the world, you can say, I've been in far worse places, and that wasn't the end of my world. So there's hope for you. You know, and I think that's really that's the story. Life happens.
Yeah.
Life happens.
Yeah.
Um, there's nothing more romantic to it than that. And it's a constant battle, especially if lots of things are being thrown at you. Not to say, I give up. And it's okay to give up temporarily. It's okay to lie on your back and say, can somebody else let me sleep on their sofa while I recover? You know,
Yeah,
is
totally.
why call back to what we mentioned earlier, why I think it's so important, because life can be brutal. And when I was younger, particularly around the age of how to get a grip and beginning my business coaching, sales training career, I used to say business is binary. It's a one or a no. There's no place for emotion. You just get on with it. You know, people say things like it's not business, it's personal, which justifies acting like a dick. And then I met Michael Port and I actually lived my own life. And Michael always used to say, look, 90% of problems, 90% of business problems are personal problems in disguise. And this was one of his things.
Mm.
And that it just immediately opened my eye. Of course. Why can one
Mhm.
person follow a very specific set of instructions, pick up the phone 100 times, read this script, ask for a meeting? This is what I used to train my guys to do. And why does one person perform so much better than another person when their actions are identical? And then how come their roles
Yeah.
swap 2 months later? How come the star performer from June is really, really struggling for 3 months in October, November, December? Because everything that happens, everything that we do, see, experience, taste, put ourselves through, has to go through the filter of, is there any friction here or is there not? And if you're distracted or so on and so forth. So I think that's made me a much better uh, business coach, because it's one thing to
Yeah.
say, here's a list of things to do, and another thing to say, yeah, no shit. No shit, you haven't made any money this month. Is your husband still beating you? You know, you can't separate. You can't separate the two things. You just can't. Um, you know.
Yeah.
So does that
You
answer your
know,
question?
oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Um, you had mentioned how important relationships are to both who you are and what feels possible for you. How have your relationships changed as this sort of orientation on the world has changed for you? Of the older you get, the less you know.
Uh, that's a good question. I still think, still in my mind, I'm still a still a teenager. When I hang out with my friends that I had when I was at school, we're just the same idiots that we were before, and we get great relief by
Yeah.
endlessly taking the piss out of each other. You know, there is no affection unless it's very, very pointed insults. And although I'm a bit of a chameleon when it comes to who I am vis-a-vis the person I'm talking to, which I think comes from coaching or maybe from people
Mm,
pleasing, but the way that one person will accept your service is perhaps different from the way another person will need to accept it, or whatever that might be. Also, people pleasing. You adapt to the person in front of you, or maybe a lack of self-awareness or insecurity in your own identity. But I have different friends for slightly different purposes.
Mhm.
I'll have one friend who I go to because we enjoy deep, not very funny chats over a cup of tea. And I have another friend who I meet with to drink whiskey and talk nonsense, and that's equally valuable for different reasons. I don't think I have fewer friends. But people say you have fewer friends. Most of my friends are not living where I'm living, so that's a challenge, right? I've moved around. I have good friends here. My best friends do not live in the same country as me. The world is a lot smaller now, and I'm lucky enough to travel frequently. And I think I'm only just learning this, but I'm less tolerant for those damaging friendships. You've got some where it's just like,
Mm.
I'm only really just discovering
Yeah.
this. And that sometimes it's easier, maybe because I have limited capacity just for anything now. Maybe as
Mhm.
my cup fills up, as my vessel slowly fills up, you just have to be more careful about what
Yeah.
you put in it, right? So I'm less likely to suffer fools than I used to. I used to not be very protective of my time. I was a giver, and now I'm very protective of my time.
Yeah.
But always open to meeting good people. And I
I
do
have to
have
say, as
I do have
somebody,
a daily practice where I make sure that my friendships aren't neglected. Literally a
yeah.
personal CRM system that says, "Hey,
Mm.
you haven't been in touch with Pancho in 60 days, drop him a note." This is a religious practice and something that I teach.
I
Yeah,
have to say, as somebody who is around you as a client, and and also in this setting, I feel that. So I remember before I decided to sign up for the single malt mastermind, there was something either you put in the sales material or I had heard you talk about of like, I don't want to work with people who don't want to get things done. I want to work
right.
with ambitious people. And the one big part of the book yourself solid system is the velvet rope policy of like people are like you gotta love the people you're working with and you gotta know what that looks like.
Yeah.
Who is your ideal client? And be able to say, no, thank you right now. This isn't right for me. And I remember reading the material being like, I don't know if I can get past this velvet rope. Like, am I that person who's going to be on the other side of this going, I should not have crossed the velvet rope? And, and also like when I've said, can I send you my email? And you're like, well, I don't really like to assign myself homework because I have a lot of things to do. And this is my zone of genius is responding to these like emails on Friday. And that's it. And I thought, well, it makes me feel really good as a client because I know you're not going to overextend yourself and say you can do more than you can. That, like, I'm
Mm.
going to get what I signed up for and
Boy,
a
did I
sprinkle
learn that
more. But
lesson. I learned that lesson the hard way
yeah, I was going to say, how'd you learn that
over
lesson?
many years. Yeah, yeah. Scope creep was very, very much a thing in my early coaching days. This was before you could click your fingers and have a website. People would come to me and they say, I'm just getting started. And I was excited to work with starters because I wasn't very experienced myself. I
Mhm.
hadn't had many reps, and I didn't want to take my first reps with $1 million businesses because imposter syndrome and what could I possibly teach them? As it turns out, if you're very, very specific about what you're advising people on, you can walk straight into $1 million businesses if you know more about them than they do about email marketing, for example. But I used to end up resenting the promises I'd make to people. They'd say, before we do that,
Hmm.
and I remember working with a couple of clients back in the early days who needed a website because it was that time of history, that time in history where you needed a website. And I wanted them to succeed because we're known by our clients' success. And I wanted them walking away saying, I had the best experience with Matthew. And they couldn't put a fucking website together. And I said, I'll do it for you. And I couldn't do it, but I worked it out. And I thought, and after a while, I was like, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? But the interesting thing about the Red Velvet Rope policy and my email program, the Single Malt Mastermind, so the Red Velvet Rope policy, which is a filtration device, basically like the job that the bouncers do on a nightclub door. You're either coming into my establishment, into my business, or we think you'd have a better time at the club down the road.
Mm.
The purpose of it is to make sure that everybody involved has the premium experience. Because if you let the wrong people into your nightclub, everybody's unhappy. The wrong people are unhappy, and the right people are unhappy. because the wrong people are there, and
Yeah.
it's and the owner is unhappy. And it doesn't have to. I'm not talking about good people versus bad people. Same music tastes. If you walk into a techno
Eh,
club and
yeah.
it's full of opera buffs, like everyone's unhappy. The techno people are going, what are these opera people standing here looking snooty about? And the opera people are
Yeah.
saying, what on earth are we doing here? This is the worst establishment in the world. It's not. It's the best place in the world for the right people. So the thing about it, though, is that it's flexible, right? You can loosen it or you can tighten it. So for an email program, like my single malt mastermind, where my exposure to a client is 5 minutes a week, 5 to 10 minutes a week, reading an email and replying to an email, you could be a psycho and join. It's okay. It's not. It's true. It's true. But if you're spending time with me on the telephone, or
Yeah.
if we're hanging out in person in a workshop, so that's why the Single Malt Mastermind, you can click a button and join. I'm not interviewing you beforehand. I'm trying to give you a really good idea ahead of time about whether it's going to be right for you or not, because I still want the same thing. I still want you to come away saying that was brilliant, but I don't have to enforce it quite so tightly. Whereas the Single Malt Mastermind Reserve, which does involve monthly one-to-one meetings, you have to fill in an application form and we have to have a chat first. Because if I'm going to give you 12 hours of my life this year, I need to be 100% sure that both of us are going to walk away saying 10 out of 10, that was amazing.
I had a question going back to what you were talking about earlier about relationships. I mean, I think we've probably answered this question, but like navigating uncertainty, not having confidence, but knowing what you do know, one. And then you did the answer you gave was, yeah, I don't carry the confidence of 27-year-old Matthew, but I have relationships and I've learned the importance of those relationships. And that gives me another kind of confidence. Like that's a different kind of certainty that is, from the way I heard you talk about it, maybe even more valuable. Um, and I was going to ask how that plays into the work you do with the people you coach now. It seems like we're already touching on that, but the question, this is true for me. I think it's probably true for Kim as well. For people who are just starting out, you mentioned, you worked with a lot of people who were just starting out. For people who are just starting out and they can't see around the next corner and they really, like I'm at a point right now at which I have the fortune of doing contract coaching, but the goal is to make the majority of my income come from my own private practice. And the contract coaching is what's keeping you on the lights right now. Um, what do you tell somebody who's in that position,
Well, for a
given
start,
all of these
I'd
lessons?
recommend that you read Book Yourself Solid for Coaches and Consultants by Michael Port and
Excellent.
Matthew Kimberley. That would be, be my first suggestion.
On it.
There's a new one. You're rewriting it, right?
So the
Or
20th
am I not supposed to
anniversary
say? We can edit that out if I'm not supposed to say that.
20th anniversary edition of Book Yourself Solid is coming out in October now. So it's 20
Cool.
years of a proven system. And if you're going to hold off to buy a version, hold off for the October one. It's evergreen. Relationships in my business have opened every single door. The only reason I have people on my email list, the only reason I have any people on my email list is not because I've gone on social media and said, join my list. I haven't. It's because other people have introduced me to their people. It's
Mm.
been recommendations, platforming. They've given me an opportunity to speak to their audience. There has been no other reason that I'm in business today other than quid pro quo with people who recognize that you go a lot further on your own. I mean, even if you look at the mechanics of it, which this conversation hasn't been about mechanics so far, but if you've got a mailing list and 70% of people aren't opening your emails, you should be trading. You should be saying, look, maybe you'd be more interested in what Kim has to say. Maybe you'd be more interested in what Pancho has to say. And you do the same for me. And it's just like, there's not a limited number of eyeballs for our attention, right? We should absolutely be sharing, and people will self-select. But if you trace my journey back through relationships, so How to Get a Grip was published because it was a blog. because it was a blog, I got interested in the blogosphere. And the blogosphere at the time was people who were writing, and the community was in the comments. So my friend had a blog, I'd leave a few comments, and we'd have blog rolls. And blog rolls were, here are the other interesting blogs that I like to read. And we built up a readership, and we didn't even have mailing lists, but we had RSS subscribers, we could RSS feeds, and we could see how many people were opting in, and we had little page counters at the bottom, but we were all supporting each other. We were all holding each other up. Now, the book deal came along simultaneously. I'm still actually, quite a big deal in the world of blogging. And so I go to Blog World Expo in Las Vegas from Brussels. I travel on my own. I don't know anybody at all. And I get chatting to people at this blogging conference, and partying with people and having fun and going to the seminars and going and saying, hey, we've exchanged comments on each other's blogs. Like, oh yeah, we're going for a coffee. Do you want to join us? And I got chatting with a chap called Srinivas Rao, and he had a podcast called Blogcast FM or something like that. I think it was called Blogcast FM. And when I told him that I had a book deal off my blog, he said, you've got to come on my podcast. And one podcast led to another, and we stayed in touch. And, they'd heard me, and rather like today, if someone's heard you on a podcast, they will pitch you to come on their podcast or on their client's podcast, whatever that was. So that started. And about a year or two later, Srini, who hosted my first ever podcast interview, invited me to go on. He'd been commissioned by a rental car company, Fox Rent-A-Car. I think it's a West Coast brand, right? It may not be everywhere, but it was called Fox Rental Car or Fox Rent-A-Car, something like that. And they approached him. They'd met him at a conference and said, listen, what should we do from a social media perspective? He goes, you need to put bloggers in a car, in one of your cars, let them do a road trip and write about it. And he called me up. He said, so I've convinced them to do this. I'm not sure how I've convinced them to do this, but I don't know where I'm going to find 4 bloggers. Would you want to be one of them? And I said, yeah. I'd absolutely love to be one of them. And so, we had a competition for the other 3 places. And one of the people who won the competition was called Amy Schmittauer. And Amy was a fledgling YouTuber. And we both did this road trip, and they'd hooked up the hotels and everything, but we had to put the incidentals on our credit card. When you check into a hotel, they put a hold. They put a hold on, like you check in, we're going to put hold on of $100 a night for however long here. We had nothing. We were broke as a joke, right? And so we were halfway around this trip from San Diego to Vegas to San Francisco and back with no money. We're like, we can't afford to check into the hotel because we can't pay. Anyway, it was hilarious. We spent 3 weeks. We became great friends, Amy and I. And, fast forward, I think maybe the year after or the year after that, or whatever the time frame was, Amy sent out an email or made an announcement or told me, she said, I'm going to be speaking at this event in the Philippines, Tropical Think Tank. This was 11 years ago, 2015. And I said, oh, that looks interesting. And I went and had a look at the website, and it listed all the speakers, including Amy. And it said there was one more plus other speakers to be announced, or surprise guests coming soon. Keep checking back. And I thought, they don't know who they're getting. So I called Amy and said, I'd like to volunteer. Can you put in a good word for me with Chris, the organizer? She said, yeah. 10 days later, me and Chris are on the phone, and he's like, dude, I'm so stoked you're going to come and speak at my event in the Philippines.
Surprise!
So we're tracing this back down to going to Blog World and having a coffee with Srini, right? So 2015, I'm on stage, or I'm in a mastermind room ahead of the conference with Lewis Howes, James Schramko, John Lee Dumas, like people who I've admired for years and years. And they were a different level of their game as well. So a decade ago. And I gave my speech at the event, and I was voted the best speaker. Peter Shankman got the most popular speaker, but he was like giving out candy and the whole and things like that. But I got you were a great speaker. And off that, because there were other important, influential people in the room who became my friends, I got more speaking gigs. Like James Schramko watched me speak, and then he runs the Superfast Business event in Sydney. So he invited me back the next year to speak to his team in Sydney. And I went to San Diego to speak at another gig, and I met people through people, and my association with Michael Port, when I basically said, I'll be your second in command, I'll be your page boy, I'll do whatever you need me to do, meant that people associated, I got transferred credibility from him. So when I call somebody like, I don't know if you know Tucky Moore, but I first made contact with Tucky in Australia. I said, look, I'm working at Put Yourself Solid. And he told me that's the only reason he answered the email, because he held
Hmm.
Michael in such high esteem. And now he's a great friend, and he's been my client, I've been his client, we hang out. There isn't a single good thing in my business that has come from my own effort. Maybe some of the assets that I've created, maybe some of the intellectual property that I've created, but all of that's been influenced by other people. But creating assets and being good at intellectual property and having great ideas and being great at making things and building things, and especially now with AI, building things really quickly. Look how productive I was today. I built 6 apps. Well, who needs 6 apps? You don't need 6 apps. You need one good relationship and an introduction. And that's been fundamental. That's been absolutely no shadow of a doubt the only reason I've still got the lights on today.
It's interesting. We said the thing that you can't unsee is that the older you get, the less you know. But it sounds like there are also things that you know better and more,
Fair enough.
like
Wow, I'll
the
take that. Yeah.
centrality of relationships.
Mm.
Yeah,
The
that's
lessons you
beautiful.
had to
Thank
actually
you.
live into to learn.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, great. Matthew, is there anything we haven't asked you that you want to share?
How am I doing so far?
I think
It's
you
been,
did it, man. I think
It's been
I
fun,
think
man.
you did it. You did the
Yeah.
thing. Um, maybe we can, Pancho, do you have anything else you want to ask?
No, this is great. Yeah. Yeah.
Where
Just
can
want to
people
say thank
find
you.
you?
So you can
Yeah,
go to
yeah, yeah.
MatthewKimberley.com. And if you're interested in working with me, I'd like that very much, perhaps, depending on the Red Velvet Rope criteria. So you can go to
It's
singlemaltmastermind.com.
psychotic. Go to
Yeah,
singlemaltmastermind.com.
exactly. So reach out and let me know how we're connected, because I read all my emails and reply to most of them.
Yes, that's true. Great. I highly recommend it. It's been great.
All
Okay.
right.
Thank you. Thank you for taking the time to do this. This has been wonderful.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. It's
Okay.
such a pleasure to meet you, Matthew.